What makes a jet-age war film unforgettable? Is it the scream of afterburners or the silence before a missile locks on? The jet age brought new wars, new heroes, and new fears. From Cold War paranoia to high-altitude duels, these films captured the danger and the disillusionment of modern combat. Here are 15 jet-age war movies that real aircrews still recommend to rookies. Number 15, The Hunters, 1958. It was meant to glorify fighter pilots, but instead it exposed their loneliness. The Hunters starred Robert Mitchum as a Korean War ace haunted by honor and exhaustion. The film was sleek, heroic, and deeply human, showing the birth of the jet fighter era when men still measured courage with their eyes, not their radars. Set against the frozen skies of Korea, it followed F-86. Sabre pilots dueling MiG-15s in battles that were half skill, half fate. The aerial footage was stunning. Real jets flown by actual military pilots in cooperation with the U.S. Air Force. But what shocked audiences was the quiet despair underneath the glamour. Mitchum played a man addicted to the chase and numb to survival. The Pentagon initially worried it was too bleak, fearing it undermined morale. The director pushed back, insisting the truth was not treason. Behind the scenes, real Sabre jets flew dangerous close passes that nearly ended in disaster. One pilot even clipped a wing during a turnover Edwards Air Force Base. Critics praised the visuals, but some veterans said the emotion hit harder than the action. The Hunters faded for decades, but was later rediscovered by military historians as one of the first films to capture the psychological cost of jet combat. Its final scene over the Yalu River remains a haunting reminder that speed cannot outrun guilt. Number 14, Flight of the Intruder, 1991. This was not a movie about heroes. It was about the rage that burns inside those who survive. Based on Stephen Kuntz's novel Flight of the Intruder, delve into the Vietnam War through the eyes of A-6 bomber pilots, tired of politics and forbidden targets. Jake Grafton and Virgil Cole were not Top Gun mavericks. They were haunted men trapped in a war that punished conscience and courage alike. Their secret mission to bomb Hanoi was both mutiny and redemption. The film balanced thrilling low-level night attacks with an anti-establishment tone that unnerved Pentagon advisors. Paramount wanted a blockbuster to rival Top Gun, but director John Milius wanted truth, not glamour. He fought with the studio over tone, insisting the movie show boredom, rage, and moral conflict rather than high fives and sunsets. The Navy gave partial support but withdrew its backing after Milius criticized command policies publicly. When the movie premiered, it was caught between generations. Vietnam vets respected its grit, but younger audiences wanted flesh, not fatigue. Critics called it confused. Yet many real A-6 crews said it came closest to the truth of their missions. Today, Flight of the Intruder stands as the anti-Top Gun, a story not of victory but survival. It shows that in jet warfare, courage often hides behind frustration, and the most dangerous flight path is the one that leads back home. Number 13, The Right Stuff, 1983. It began as a movie about astronauts, but every pilot knew it was a war film in disguise. The Right Stuff told the story of the men who broke the sound barrier and pushed jet combat into space. It was a hymn to courage, written in contrails and blood. Director Philip Kaufman adapted Tom Wolfe's epic book into a sprawling saga about test pilots turned heroes. Chuck Yeager, the quiet giant who flew into the unknown, embodied the last of the true aviators. The film's portrayal of Edwards Air Force Base felt like holy ground. Every takeoff, a leap of faith; every crash, a prayer. Production was chaos. Real jets were used alongside elaborate miniatures. The cast trained with real aviators, and one stunt pilot died filming a high-speed maneuver. The U.S. Air Force hesitated to cooperate, fearing the film's portrayal of arrogance and recklessness would offend command culture. Despite the turmoil, The Right Stuff became one of the most celebrated aviation films ever made. Its mix of dark humor, realism, and awe inspired generations of pilots and astronauts. It reminded the world that before rockets came wings, before astronauts came test pilots who risked everything for speed. Veterans still recommend it not because it teaches tactics, but because it reveals something deeper. The Right Stuff is about endurance, the invisible fuel that keeps a pilot steady when everything else is burning away. Number 12. The Bridges at Toko-Ri, 1954. This was the film that made Navy pilots cry in silence. The Bridges at Toko-Ri was not a grand adventure. It was a confession about fear duty and the futility of war. Based on James Meisner's novella, it followed Lieutenant Harry Brubaker, a lawyer-turned-fighter pilot flying dangerous missions over Korea in his F-9F Panther. The story was simple but devastating. Brubaker did not want to be a hero. He wanted to go home. Yet duty called him again and again to fly into the freezing valleys of North Korea to destroy bridges that always seemed to rebuild themselves. The movie's realism came from the Navy itself, which allowed filming on actual carriers and used real combat footage shot from the decks. William Holden's weary eyes carried the entire movie. He did not act bravery. He acted exhaustion. Behind the scenes, Holden nearly walked off set arguing that the studio was romanticizing death. Director Mark Robson convinced him to stay by rewriting scenes to show quiet fear rather than hollow pride. When the film released in 1954, it shocked audiences with its ending. The hero does not survive. There are no medals, no rescue, no glory. The U.S. Navy initially objected to that ending, but Meisner insisted on truth over comfort. The Pentagon reluctantly approved, fearing backlash if they interfered. For decades, aircrews have called this the most honest jet-age war film ever made. It showed that courage is not about loving war. It is about flying anyway. The closing line still echoes through flight schools everywhere. Where do we get such men? Number 11. The Blue Max, 1966. This was a film out of time, a World War I story told through the eyes of the jet generation. The Blue Max followed a ruthless German pilot who clawed his way from the trenches to the cockpit. But behind its canvas wings hid a jet-age message about ambition, technology, and the cost of glory. George Peppard played Lieutenant Stachel, a man obsessed with medals and recognition. He would risk anything to earn the Blue Max the highest German flying honor. The film's aerial scenes were revolutionary, real biplanes rebuilt and flown for authentic dogfights. Director John Gillerman demanded perfection. The flying sequences took months to film, and one pilot died when his replica aircraft crashed during a low turn. Though set in the Great War, it resonated with pilots in the jet era. It exposed the same pride in politics that ruled modern squadrons. The German Air Force banned screenings on certain bases, fearing it encouraged insubordination. Peppard himself clashed with Guillermin during production, walking off set twice due to exhaustion. Critics admired its beauty but condemned its cynicism. Yet aircrews saw truth in every frame. Technology changes. The hunger for validation does not. The Blue Max became a cult classic among pilots who saw themselves in Stachel's fatal climb toward perfection. It remains a mirror held up to every generation of flyers. A story that warns that ambition without soul will always crash before it lands. Number 10. Top Gun, 1986. It was not just a movie. It was a myth built on afterburners and adrenaline. Top Gun turned the F-14 Tomcat into a global icon and made every teenager want to fly. But behind the glamour was a propaganda machine that made even real pilots uneasy. The story followed Maverick and Goose, two Navy aviators competing for glory at the Navy Fighter Weapons School. What audiences saw was the birth of the modern action blockbuster. Sweaty cockpits, thunderous jet roars, and a love story set against the backdrop of danger. What they did not see was the tight control the Pentagon exercised over every frame. The U.S. Navy provided jets, carriers, and pilots, but demanded script approval. Scenes showing reckless flying were rewritten. Real-life F-14 crashes were ignored. Director Tony Scott fought for style over realism, shooting during golden hour light to make the sky burn. He spent $25,000 of his own money for just 5 minutes of carrier footage after being denied by producers. Behind the scenes, actors vomited during flight sequences. Tom Cruise trained with real pilots, enduring G-forces that made him black out. The film nearly lost its ewe, Soundtrack rights when Kenny Loggins' song was deemed too edgy for military promotion. Yet when it released in 1986, recruitment lines outside Navy offices doubled overnight. Veterans respected the flying, but not the fantasy. They called it rock and roll aviation, a dream version of their nightmare. Still, Top Gun became legend. It gave the jet age its anthem. And even those who mocked it admitted one thing: it made them look to the sky again. Number 9. Bat-21, 1988. This was the jet age without the glory. Bat-21 told the real story of Lieutenant Colonel Isel Gene Hambleton, a U.S. Air Force navigator shot down during the Vietnam War. Instead of sleek dogfights or triumphant rescues, the film focused on fear, radio static, and the brutal math of survival. Gene Hackman played Hambleton with grim restraint, a man bleeding, crawling, and calculating his every move as enemy forces closed in. Danny Glover portrayed the pilot who becomes his voice of hope, guiding him step by step using coded football plays that hid their instructions from enemy interceptors. Behind the scenes, the film faced its own dangers. Shot in the Malaysian wilderness, production was battered by monsoon rains that destroyed equipment and forced crews to wade through waist-deep swamps. A helicopter accident during filming injured stunt personnel and halted work for weeks. The Pentagon offered only limited backing, wary of how the real mission exposed tragic friendly fire errors and command confusion. When Bat-21 released, some critics found it too quiet, but real aviators recognized its truth. The film captured the claustrophobic terror of a downed airman mission better than any flashy blockbuster. It remains essential because it shows jet-age warfare stripped to its core: fear, endurance, and the fragile thread that keeps one man alive. Number 8. The Great Santini, 1979. This was not about war, but about the men war creates. The Great Santini told the story of Lieutenant Colonel Bull Meacham, a Marine pilot who brought the battlefield home. Played with volcanic intensity by Robert Duvall, he was part hero, part tyrant, and all pilot. Set between wars, it explored the emotional fallout of men trained for combat who could not turn off the switch of control. Meacham ruled his family like a squadron, using discipline as armor against fear. His jet cockpit was his church, his home, his war zone. Behind the scenes, Duvall immersed himself in Marine aviation culture training with real pilots at Beaufort Air Station. He flew in F-4 Phantoms and studied the body language of officers to capture their authority. The film's honesty came from its author Pat Conroy, whose own father was the real Bull Meacham. When released, it split audiences. Some saw it as an attack on military fathers, others saw it as a mirror of their pain. The Marine Corps refused official cooperation, calling it unflattering. Yet years later, veterans embraced it as truth. Not every hero comes home. Some stay trapped inside the uniform. The Great Santini endures because it dares to say what others avoid, that beneath the steel and the flight suits are men trying not to fall apart, and that sometimes the hardest battles are not fought in the sky but at the dinner table. Number 7. Dark Blue World, 2001. A Czech film that stunned Western pilots. Dark Blue World told the forgotten story of Czech aviators who fought for Britain during World War II and were betrayed after victory. But it was more than a period piece. It was a haunting reflection of the jet age's earliest lessons about loyalty and loss. The film followed two pilots, Franta and Karel, who joined the RAF to fight the Luftwaffe. Their friendship and rivalry unfolded against the thunder of Spitfires, but the film's soul was in its aftermath. After the war, they returned home as heroes only to be imprisoned by their own government for serving the West. Director John Svarak used real aircraft blended with CGI to recreate dogfights so authentic they rivaled anything from Hollywood. The Czech Air Force lent support but warned the production not to glorify defection or rebellion. The film quietly defied them. Critics compared it to Saving Private Ryan for its emotion and to The Right Stuff for its spirit. Western audiences wept at its final scenes, but in Prague, screenings were cut short by protests from political hardliners who saw it as anti-communist propaganda. Dark Blue World became a cult favorite among aviators because it captured the eternal truth of flying, that the sky is free even when nations are not. Pilots tell rookies to watch it not for tactics but for soul. because it shows that freedom always has a landing cost. Number 6. Iron Eagle, 1986. It came out the same year as Top Gun, but lived in a different world. Iron Eagle was the rebel cousin, the one that looked at military regulations and laughed. It told the story of a teenage pilot who steals an F-16 to rescue his captured father from a hostile Middle Eastern country. It was fantasy, reckless, impossible, and yet somehow it inspired a generation of pilots to dream big. The film starred Jason Gedrick as Doug Masters and Louis Gossett Jr. as Colonel Chappie Sinclair, a veteran who guides the boy on his rogue mission. What could have been a childish adventure became a strangely emotional story about mentorship, loyalty, and the hunger for redemption. Real Air Force pilots admit that while the premise was absurd, the spirit of the film was pure courage. Behind the scenes, the production was a miracle. The U.S. Air Force refused to cooperate, calling the plot illegal and dangerous. Director Sidney J. Fury turned instead to the Israeli Air Force, which allowed access to real jets and pilots. Many of the flight scenes were filmed in secret at Tel Nof Air Base under strict supervision. The dogfights were dazzling, shot practically with real aircraft flying low over the desert. But tragedy haunted the set. A stunt pilot was killed when his jet failed to pull out of a dive. The film was dedicated to his memory. Critics mocked Iron Eagle as cartoonish, yet it quietly gained a cult following among cadets who saw in it the same raw desire that led them to fly. Iron Eagle spawned 3 sequels, each more improbable than the last, but its original message stayed true. The uniform does not make the aviator. The will to rise against fear does. Pilots still tell rookies that you do not need approval to chase the sky, you only need heart. Number 5. The Final Countdown, 1980. Few films blended fantasy and military realism like this one. The Final Countdown imagined a U.S. aircraft carrier suddenly transported back to December 6, 1941, hours before the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. It was not just a time travel story, it was a moral test. What would modern warriors do if they could rewrite history? Kirk Douglas played Captain Yelland, a man torn between duty and destiny. When his crew discovers the date, they face an impossible question. Should they use F-14 Tomcats to annihilate the incoming Japanese fleet, or let history unfold unchanged? The tension was not in the action, but in the choice. The film had unprecedented military cooperation. The Navy allowed full access to the USS Nimitz, then its most advanced carrier. Real flight operations were filmed on deck, including takeoffs and landings under storm conditions. The sequence where Tomcats chase Zero fighters remains one of the most breathtaking air scenes ever captured on film. Behind the camera, things were not as smooth. Director Don Taylor clashed with producers who wanted more spectacle while he wanted philosophy. The Navy grew uneasy about the idea of soldiers defying history and demanded script revisions. Several crew members were injured during filming when a jet exhaust blast threw debris across the deck. When it premiered in 1980, critics dismissed it as pulp, but aircrews loved it. They admired how it portrayed the precision and power of carrier aviation without apology. Over the years, it became a cult favorite among pilots and sailors alike. They say it is not about war, it is about responsibility. The power to change history is nothing compared to the burden of knowing you could. Number 4. Memphis Belle, 1990. Though set in World War II, its soul belonged to the jet age. Memphis Belle told the story of a B-17 crew on their final bombing mission over Germany. It was about bravery, repetition, and the weariness that comes from surviving too long. Air crews from every era recognized themselves in that exhaustion. The film was inspired by a real bomber and its crew, but director Michael Caton Jones wanted to speak to a new generation of aviators. He shot the movie with the rhythm of a modern jet film. Fast cuts, engine roars, cockpit chatter. Yet he never lost the human element. Every face under the oxygen mask felt fragile. Real aircraft were used, not models. The production gathered 5 operational B-17s from museums around the world. The flight scenes were choreographed like ballet, with pilots flying within feet of each other to simulate combat formations. One aircraft suffered an engine fire during filming and barely made it back to base. The U.S. Air Force lent logistical support but refused to glorify the bombing campaign. The film was forced to tone down scenes of civilian destruction. Even so, veterans wept during the premiere. They said it captured the smell, the cold, and the claustrophobic terror better than anything before. Behind the scenes, actors trained with real aviators to learn the cockpit rituals and crew coordination. Matthew Modine later said the experience changed his view of courage forever. Critics praised the film's authenticity and restraint. It reminded audiences that even in the most advanced age of warfare, humanity remains the weakest link. Memphis Belle became required viewing at some training programs not for tactics, but for empathy. It showed that beneath every mission log lies fear, fatigue, and friendship. For aircrews, old or young, it remains a reminder that bravery is not noise. It is endurance in the face of chaos. Number 3. The Dam Busters, 1955. It was the film that inspired 1,000 pilots to believe in the impossible. The Dam Busters told the story of the Royal Air Force's legendary 1943 mission to destroy German dams using Barnes-Wallis's revolutionary bouncing bomb. It was not just a World War II film. It was a blueprint for every jet-age aviator who would later face the same questions of innovation and sacrifice. Directed by Michael Anderson, the movie mixed documentary precision with emotional depth. The RAF allowed unprecedented access to bases and aircraft. Real Lancaster bombers were flown in formation through narrow valleys at night to recreate the attack runs. The actors were outshone by the machines, but that was the point. The movie was about teamwork, courage, and invention. Behind the scenes, the British Air Ministry objected to releasing certain technical details, fearing the film revealed too much about military tactics. Anderson used coded references and invented terminology to satisfy them. One test model of the bouncing bomb actually exploded during filming, damaging a hangar and forcing production to relocate. When the Dam Busters premiered, it was hailed as national catharsis. But decades later, it was banned from several international broadcasts for using wartime racial language. Restoration teams eventually re-released an edited version preserving the heroic story without the dated dialogue. Pilots loved it because it captured the precision and coordination they lived by. Even in the jet age, aircrews still show it to recruits. It is not about speed or power. It is about trust. It reminds them that technology means nothing without the men who risk everything to make it work. The roar of those engines echoes through every cockpit that ever took off into the unknown. Number 2. 13 Days, 2000. It was not a war film in the traditional sense. It was a film about the war that almost was. 13 Days chronicled the Cuban Missile Crisis through the eyes of those inside the White House and the cockpits that never launched. It showed how close the jet age came to burning the world. Kevin Costner played Kenneth O'Donnell, an advisor trapped between loyalty and conscience. The movie followed the tension as American pilots flew reconnaissance missions over Cuba, knowing that one wrong move could start nuclear Armageddon. The roar of the U-2 and F-8 Crusader engines was more terrifying than any explosion. Every flight could have been the last. Behind the scenes, the Pentagon refused cooperation. They disliked the film's portrayal of insubordination and chaos within command ranks. The filmmakers relied on declassified transcripts to reconstruct dialogue and had to hire retired pilots to simulate the missions. Shooting the aerial sequences required special clearance to fly at near classified altitudes. When it premiered, historians praised its accuracy, while officials quietly fumed at its candor. Many real veterans of the crisis later admitted that it was the closest depiction ever made of what those 13 days truly felt like. Aircrews today still watch it in strategy schools, not for entertainment, but for perspective. 13 Days reminds rookies that sometimes the most heroic flight is the one never taken. That restraint is a form of courage, and that the jet age nearly destroyed itself before it could even begin. Number 1. Fail Safe, 1964. This was the nightmare the jet age never wanted to face. Fail Safe told the story of a U.S. bomber squadron mistakenly ordered toward Moscow after a technical glitch triggers an irreversible nuclear command. The pilots, trained to obey even the unthinkable, fly calmly toward their targets while leaders on the ground unravel. There are no battles, only dread. Henry Fonda played the president forced into an impossible choice: sacrifice an American city to prevent World War. The stillness of the pilots, the cold discipline in their voices, made the film more terrifying than any explosion. The Pentagon refused full cooperation and quietly attempted to discourage production. Officials feared the movie revealed too much about real command protocols and exposed the fragility of nuclear safeguards. Director Sidney Lumet shot the film in stark black and white to emphasize its documentary realism. The tension came not from action, but from silence. The hum of radios, the clicking of machines, the fear of men realizing that technology had outrun their control. Audiences in 1964 found it too bleak, overshadowed by the satirical Dr. Strangelove. But pilots and strategists embraced it. Failsafe remains a chilling reminder that the deadliest jet-age mission is the one no one meant to launch. From Korea's cold skies to Vietnam's burning clouds, the jet age changed how wars were fought and how pilots were remembered. These 15 films capture the courage, the cost, and the conscience of flight. Which one do you think defines the jet age best? Let us know below and subscribe for more stories where history still flies.